At 5:32 a.m., the lake looked like glass, a mirror too fragile to breathe on, and still the bulldozer's reverse beep carried across the water like an alarm clock set by someone who hated me. Diesel smoke curled into the mist. My boots were still wet from the shoreline when the first chain snapped against steel, and that sound, the metallic bite of cutters on links, was the moment I realized the association wasn't just sending letters anymore. They were coming for the water itself. I had bought Birchwood Lake with back pay and stubborn hope, restored it plank by plank, dredge by dredge, and now the HOA claimed it had always belonged to them. The sun hadn't even broken the trees, but war already had. If you've ever had someone try to take what's yours with a smile and a stamped letterhead, you'll understand why I'm telling this story. Mark your place here so you can come back to it. Tap the like button to share it further. Drop your hometown in the comments so I know where people are standing their ground. And subscribe if you want to hear how ordinary families fight extraordinary bullies. The morning broke soft, all haze and dew, the kind of silence where you can hear your own pulse if you hold still long enough. Birchwood Lake lay in front of me like a secret, glassy and fragile, reflecting the first streaks of rose light that clung to the sky. For a moment, standing on the dock I built with my own hands, I could believe the place was mine and safe, that the year I had spent hauling out tires and beer cans, dredging muck that smelled like rusted pennies, had given the water back its voice. But then the diesel engine started, low at first like a growl waking in the woods, then louder, teeth on metal, an insult to morning peace. I turned and saw them at the edge of the access road. The bulldozer crouched like a yellow beast, exhaust coughing into the mist, and behind it, two men in vests tugging at a heavy chain I had stretched across the gravel. Their bolt cutters flashed once in the dim, the cold bite of steel on steel, and when the first link snapped, it echoed across the lake like a gunshot. That was the sound that told me the war for Birchwood had begun. I stood barefoot on the dock, mug in hand, and watched them as if distance might change what I was seeing. It didn't. They weren't county men. I knew county crews, knew the faces, the trucks, the official seals on their doors. These were contractors in clean hard hats, harbour and ledge construction stenciled on their rigs, a name I had only ever seen on subdivision developments out by the highway. They had no jurisdiction here, no order, nothing but a letter taped to my gate the night before, a letter signed in neat cursive by Meredith Vale, President of the Shoreline Association Meredith, 52 years old, realtor's smile lacquered on even when it didn't fit, peppermint gum always under her tongue. She was the kind of person who measured her self-worth by how many neighbors jumped when she snapped her fingers. And she had snapped hard since the day I closed on the deed. I bought Birchwood a year ago. Parcel B117, stamped, notarized, and recorded at the county clerk's office. My father's Navy pension and every dollar of back pay from deployment were pooled into one stubborn purchase. The lake was dying when I found it, choked with algae, crawfish gone, fish belly up in water too thin to breathe. I told myself I could bring it back. Told myself I owed the land something better than neglect. And slowly I did. The silt came out bucket by bucket. The spillway was rebuilt stone by stone, and the dock was hammered together on weekends until the boards knew my weight. At night, I'd sit with my boots off and listen to frogs return to the reeds. That lake became my anchor, my inheritance, the one thing that didn't slip. The HOA saw it differently. To them, it was never mine. To them, Birchwood Lake had always been a shared amenity, a phrase that tastes like aluminum in the mouth. They pointed to bylaws written in 1989, words about community waters that never mentioned parcel B117, but were broad enough to scare anyone who hadn't read their deed. The first notice came folded in a plastic sleeve, taped to my gate at eye level, accusing me of unauthorized shoreline alteration. Fines, $50 a day. The second letter called my spillway a hazard, another $100 per day. By the third, I stopped counting. Still the paper I could handle. The paper was noise. But machines at dawn, engines idling against the fog, that was something else. That was muscle. I put down my mug and started toward the road. Gravel crunched under my heels. One of the men looked up, smirked, and shouted over the clamor, "Road's closed, pal." "Safety order." "Whose order?" I asked, voice steady. "Shoreline Association," he said. Like it was gospel. "The Shoreline Association doesn't own this parcel," I answered, holding up the folded deed from my back pocket. creased and sweat-worn from how often I'd shown it. "I do." The man shrugged and turned back to the bolt cutters. "Not my problem. We've got a job." Behind them, the dozer shifted gears, treads chewing into gravel. Diesel smoke clung to the air, bitter and oily. My pulse climbed. Not from fear, but from the raw insult of it. Machines threatening to carve up what I'd built before the sun even cleared the tree line. That was when Meredith appeared. She always did like to show up after the work had already begun, heels clicking like punctuation on asphalt. She stood at the end of the access road in a pearl grey coat, hair neat, lipstick sharp. To her right, Gordon Pruitt, the board treasurer, a man with rings on every finger and eyes that never looked past balance sheets. To her left, Blake Henley, the property manager, tablet in hand like a shield. Together they looked like a council of vultures waiting for something to die. "Owen," Meredith called, voice smooth as glass. "You should have responded to our notices." "I did," I said. "Every time." The answer was the same. "This lake isn't yours," she smiled, that peppermint grin. "The community disagrees, and community standards must be upheld." I laughed once, short and sharp, because otherwise I might have put my fist through something. "Community standards don't trump a deed. You know that." Her smile didn't break. "Deeds are just paper, Owen. Safety is reality. And the reality is this lake poses a risk." A risk. That word rolled out of her mouth like a stone sliding into water. The only risk here was to her illusion of control. Birchwood Lake was healthy again, clearer than it had been in years, and the only danger was that I wouldn't bow. The bulldozer growled forward another foot, metal teeth poised at the spillway. My fists clenched until my nails dug crescents into my palms. Every instinct screamed to stand in front of it, to put myself between the machine and the water. And I would have, if not for the small sound behind me, the creak of a screen door, the nervous clearing of a throat. Emmett, my neighbor, stood on his porch in his work boots, arms crossed, watching. Lila, his wife, tugged at his sleeve, whispering, but he didn't move. Other porch lights flickered on up and down Lakeside Loop, faces at windows, curtains twitching. They were all watching, silent, waiting to see who would break first, the man with the deed or the woman with the board. The chain fell to the ground in a heap. The dozer roared louder, gears shifting. Meredith lifted a hand, graceful as a conductor. The machine inched forward. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about water or bylaws or safety. It was about power, raw and simple. And once someone like Meredith tastes it, they'll do anything to keep it. The dozer's blade caught the light. My chest tightened, but my feet moved forward anyway, one step then another, until I stood in the road directly in front of the machine. Its driver leaned out, hard hat tipped back, and shouted, "You're gonna get yourself killed, man." "Not before you trespass on federal property," I said, voice louder than I thought it could be. His brows knotted, uncertain. I pointed at the decals still visible on my dock equipment, surplus I'd hauled from a base auction, stamped with government inventory codes. The hesitation bought me seconds, but seconds were enough. Behind me, Emmett took a step off his porch, then another. And then a second porch door slammed, another set of boots. Crunching gravel. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months were suddenly walking toward the road, not saying a word, just watching the dozer with the kind of eyes that make a man question his paycheck. The driver killed the engine. Silence crashed down heavier than any noise. Meredith's face stiffened, but she didn't move. She wasn't used to resistance. That morning ended with chains in the dirt, machines idling in defeat, and a peppermint smile that had cracked just barely. But I knew it was only the beginning. People like Meredith didn't lose quietly. They retreated, regrouped, and came back sharper, and when they did, they wouldn't just bring paper and machines. They would bring the whole neighborhood with them. The week after the bulldozer standoff, the neighborhood stopped talking with its mouth and started talking with its eyes. Paper spoke for them now. Thick envelopes with certified stickers. Slips slid under my door like warnings from ghosts. Each one smelled of ink and toner, edges sharp enough to cut. And each one told a story of rules I never agreed to, but was somehow already breaking. The first envelope arrived with the morning chill still on it, condensation smudging the stamp. "Failure to comply with community safety ordinances," it read, as if the lake itself had signed the charge. The penalty, $200 a day. The next letter, stacked on top of it, raised the fine to $3, citing continued obstruction. Each line was phrased like scripture, cold and sure, but when I traced the citations back, I found nothing, bylaws bent out of shape, clauses amputated and stitched to others until they no longer resembled law at all. They didn't need to kick down my door anymore. They had paper, and paper multiplies like mold. At night I began to notice the hum, a low, constant vibration drifting up the hill from the cul-de-sac, headlights flicking against my curtains at odd hours. A white SUV with a hawk emblem parked at the end of my drive, engine running, windows black. Not the police. Not county. Just a logo I'd never seen until Shoreline's last newsletter announced a partnership with Sentinel Ridge Security to ensure compliance. The men inside never got out, never spoke, just idled like vultures waiting for something to fall. The lake, which I'd fought to hear breathing again, now felt like a microphone pointed at my life. I caught the whir of a drone one dusk, faint as a mosquito, then louder as it dipped low across the water, lens blinking red. It circled my dock twice before gliding back toward the Vale house, Meredith's silhouette framed by porch light. She watched the sky like she had just called down rain. Neighbors shifted too. Where Leela once brought me tomatoes, now she tugged Emmett's arm and steered him inside when I waved. Kids stopped biking past my yard, their tires crunching detours into the gravel across the street. At the grocery store, I felt eyes on my back as I bought lumber and rope. Conversations hushed when I reached the checkout. Silence spreads quickly in the suburbs. It infects faster than gossip when people are afraid to be next. The notices thickened. One accused me of unregistered commercial activity, another of unauthorized gatherings, even though the only gatherings had been her contractors trespassing on my road. A packet arrived scheduling a hearing at 6:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, a time chosen so no one would attend, so their notes could say I refused my chance to speak. It wasn't about the law, it was about pressure. Like a net tightening slowly enough, you don't feel it until you can't breathe. I logged everything. Dates, times, plate numbers of SUVs, even the sound of the drone which I recorded on my phone. A thin mechanical whine under the wind. At night I wrote it all in a spiral notebook, with hands that shook but refused to stop, because one day someone would need proof that what looked like suburban order was really a quiet war. The HOA wasn't trying to scare me off the lake. They were teaching the neighborhood what happens when you stand against them. And in every shadow, every camera, every folded sheet of paper, I could feel the net pulling tighter. And still, I had no idea how deep their game already ran. I never trusted the way the Shoreline Vale board carried themselves, like actors in a play where the ending was already rehearsed. But I didn't expect to find the script itself. It happened on a Friday evening. The sky bruised purple, air heavy with lake mist. I'd come home to another envelope duct-taped to my front door, the kind that tore splinters from the wood when I pulled it off. Inside was a notice about upcoming hearings. The language was too neat, too polished, and something in me wanted to see how far their theater went. I drove to the community center that night when the lot was empty, except for one sedan with a parking sticker crooked in the window. Through the glass doors, past rows of folding chairs, the boardroom smelled of stale coffee and toner. I expected emptiness. Instead, I found a folder carelessly left on the lectern. My name was on the tab. Inside were minutes from a meeting that hadn't happened yet, scheduled for Monday. The lines were already filled. Mr. Owen Callahan failed to appear. Decision to escalate fines unanimously approved. Recommendation to pursue foreclosure if non-compliance continues. The ink was still fresh, but the judgment had already been cast. My pulse hammered as I flipped through the rest. Tucked between agenda sheets were notes scribbled in a different hand, less formal but more revealing. Vale wants the road clear for Phase 2. Demolition crew on standby if financing clears. And then a single line underlined twice. Lakefront secured by spring. My lake. My land. Written like it was a stage prop waiting to be hauled away. Behind me a floorboard creaked. I stuffed the folder under my jacket and slipped out before the silhouette at the end of the hall could make me out. My hands shook as I drove home, headlights bouncing off empty roads, the folder burning like contraband in the passenger seat. That night, under the low hum of the fridge, I read every page by lamplight. Their meetings weren't meetings. They were rehearsals of verdicts. Fines were never discussed. They were predetermined. Votes were scripted long before neighbors raised their hands. And at the heart of it all was the Vale Development Group, Meredith's family empire. Using Shoreline's HOA as a puppet stage to turn residents into pawns, property into profit. The bile in my throat tasted like betrayal. My neighbors thought they were attending community meetings, thought their signatures mattered, thought their voices carried weight. But it was all theater, a script written in advance, each of us cast as fools. As dawn bled grey over the lake, I realized this wasn't just harassment anymore. This was a conspiracy, and I was holding its proof. And the question that hollowed my chest was simple and suffocating. How many people already knew? It began with curtains, thin suburban curtains that used to flutter open for a wave or a smile, now trembling closed at the first glimpse of me. People didn't need to be told what to do. Fear moves faster than orders. By the second week after I found the pre-written minutes, the entire neighborhood had turned into a living security camera. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel the street inhale. Mrs. Kowalski, who once brought me cinnamon rolls, now stood in her driveway with arms folded, whispering into her phone while pretending to prune roses. The Sanders boys, who used to fish off my dock, now took the long way home from school, their bike tires crunching gravel as if they didn't know me. Even the mail carrier had started sliding letters into my box like they were contraband. One night, I walked to the edge of the lake just to clear my head. The air smelled of damp pine and outboard fuel. Across the water, porch lights blinked on in sequence, 3, then 4, then 5, until it looked like a landing strip. I knew they were signals. I'd seen that kind of coordination before overseas. Neighbors moving like watchmen. Someone had told them I was a threat. Sentinel Ridge Security's SUV showed up at dusk every evening now, parking at a new angle each night, its headlights off but the engine humming like a predator. Sometimes there were 2 vehicles, one at the cul-de-sac, one at the top of my drive, like jaws closing. They didn't approach, didn't even roll the window down. They just sat, men in polo shirts with radios clipped to their belts, faces lit by the glow of tablets. Inside my house, the notices continued to arrive. One accused me of storing hazardous materials in my garage. Another claimed excessive noise from late-night gatherings, though I was alone except for the creak of the old floorboards and the whine of my security system spinning up. Each letter was a nail, each nail part of a coffin being built around me in broad daylight. I started sleeping with the blinds open, not because I wasn't afraid, but because I wanted them to know I could see them too. At 2 a.m., when the drone returned, its little red eye blinking over my roof, I held my phone up to record it. The footage showed it hovering just long enough to catch the reflection of its pilot. Meredith Vale's porch light behind her like a halo, her arms crossed as she watched the sky. It wasn't just surveillance. It was isolation. Calls to my neighbors went unanswered. Texts bounced back. Even my contractor cancelled repairs on my dock after a call from the HOA. One by one, support beams in my life were being pulled until the house of my resolve creaked under its own weight. I remembered my grandfather's stories about how pressure works. Not a hammer blow, but a slow tightening of the vice until you beg for it to stop. This wasn't about my lake anymore. It was about making me an example, teaching the neighborhood what happens when you resist Shoreline Vale. And yet, in that quiet suffocation, a strange kind of clarity formed. The HOA wanted me cut off. That meant they were afraid of what I held. They didn't know how much I'd already documented, or that the folder of pre-written minutes was now locked in a safe deposit box an hour away. Paranoia is a blade that cuts both ways. They had turned my neighbors into watchmen, but watchmen can also become witnesses, and on nights when the lake lay still as glass and the wind carried the echo of their whispered plans, I knew the next move wasn't mine. It was theirs. And it was coming soon. The first Leon notice arrived like a snake in my mailbox, coiled and ready to strike. Certified envelope, embossed with the Shoreline Vale HOA seal, citing me for failure to remedy hazardous conditions and threatening immediate encumbrance on my property. The words were heavy but hollow, designed to sound official enough to scare, vague enough to avoid challenge. 2 days later, a summons for illegal commercial activity appeared on my door, claiming my restoration of the lake constituted an unlicensed business venture. Then came the noise violation fines, $500 a day for disturbances, that only existed on paper. Each charge landed like a hammer blow, designed to wear me down before I could respond. I spread the letters out on my kitchen table one night, the paper overlapping like scales, each one cold under my palms. Their dates revealed a pattern, each notice timed to a development milestone I'd found in the stolen minutes. Vale Development's financing had cleared. My property had become an obstacle, and they were building a legal wall to box me in. At dusk, I walked the lake's edge to breathe. Across the water, Sentinel Ridge's SUVs idled, silhouettes of men with tablets glowing in their laps. I caught one of them taking photos of my dock, flash popping like heat lightning. The smell of damp earth mixed with gasoline drifted over the water. Fear tastes metallic when it's this constant, but fear also sharpens. I'd been a logistics officer before I bought this lake. I knew how to build a case as well as they did. That night, I drove to my sister's place 2 counties over, folder under my arm, and locked everything into a safe deposit box at her credit union. Copies of the pre-written minutes, photos of the SUVs, recordings of the drones, and even a flash drive of Sentinel Ridge's license plates. If they wanted to play chess, I'd play 2 boards at once. The next morning, when the HOA posted yet another citation on my door, this one for unapproved exterior modifications, claiming my boathouse color violated aesthetic guidelines, I left it hanging like bait. Cameras hidden in my eaves recorded the man who posted it. Not a board member, not a county worker. One of Sentinel Ridge's men in a polo shirt with an earpiece. He looked straight into my lens before walking away, as if daring me to act. It was then I understood. These weren't just fines. They were camouflage. Each paper nailed to my door added another layer of bureaucracy over a far uglier operation. And if the HOA was willing to cross the line from governance into harassment, how far would they go when cornered? I began logging everything like evidence for war crimes. Times, dates, names, even the smell of perfume lingering on envelopes. Each detail was a bullet in the chamber of a case I was quietly building. They thought isolation would weaken me. In reality, it was clarifying me, teaching me how to move. By the end of that week, my kitchen table was covered in a second layer, my own documents, my counter-offensive. Photographs, affidavits, time-stamped recordings. A map of their movements was traced across the lake like battle plans. They'd escalated from fines to liens. My escalation would be proof to prosecutors, but I still didn't know the full scope of their desperation. And when they finally made their boldest move, they wouldn't just send paper. They'd send machines. The morning they came for me began with the low growl of engines echoing off the lake, like thunder rolling through a hollow chest. At first I thought it was just the garbage trucks or some neighbor's renovation crew, but the sound didn't fade. It multiplied, a chorus of heavy machines converging on Shoreline Vale like predators scenting blood. I pulled back my blinds, and the sight made my stomach drop. A convoy of vehicles snaked down the cul-de-sac, flatbeds carrying excavators, bulldozers with their blades already angled down like weapons, pickup trucks bristling with orange vests, and men gripping clipboards as if those papers gave them the right to tear apart a life. The HOA logo was slapped across their door magnets, cheap vinyl peeling in the corners, but the equipment itself was too new, too powerful, too organized. This wasn't a neighborhood job. This was a sanctioned assault. The demolition crew rolled up to my property line, brakes squealing, diesel fumes choking the morning air. The lead foreman barked orders as if rehearsed. Secure the perimeter, prep the boathouse, rip the dock first. I stepped outside barefoot, the gravel biting into my feet, heart pounding against my ribs so hard it felt like a drumbeat of defiance. Not 1 inch, I told them, voice steadier than I expected. This is my land, my water. You put that blade down and you're crossing into federal crimes. One of the men laughed, a dry, hollow sound. Orders are orders. HOA says this is community property now. His hand brushed the side of his excavator, like a man petting a beast. Behind them, Meredith Vale herself appeared, stepping out of a white SUV in tailored slacks and sunglasses that mirrored the sunrise. She didn't look at me. She looked past me, as though the house and lake were already hers. Her voice cut the air like glass. Remove the obstructions. Engines roared to life, and my fear crystallized into something sharper. Rage, cold and precise. I reached for the cameras I'd hidden, the drone I'd prepped, the evidence I'd been collecting. If they touched so much as a single board of my dock, the world would see. Not just the county, not just the state. The whole damn country. I planted myself at the water's edge, hands clenched, the smell of diesel and lakeweed swirling around me. Every nerve screamed to run, but instead I rooted myself deeper. If they wanted my land, they'd have to grind me into dust along with it. That morning, as steel teeth hovered over my lake, I understood what war in suburbia truly looked like. It wasn't bullets or bombs. It was paper dressed as law, machines wrapped in bureaucracy, neighbors turned into silent spectators. And as the first bulldozer lurched forward, I whispered to myself the only promise that mattered: they will not bury me. The first crack in their armor didn't come from me, it came from their own arrogance. The bulldozers had lurched forward that morning, but before steel touched soil, the county sheriff's cruiser rolled up, blue lights flashing against the lake water like a warning. For a second I thought reinforcements had arrived for the board, but when the deputy stepped out, his eyes didn't scan me. They scanned them. "Got a call about unlicensed demolition," he said, voice clipped, resting a hand on his belt. The foreman's face tightened, clipboard shifting in his grip. Meredith Vale's sunglasses didn't move, but I saw her jaw clench, the faintest flicker of calculation betraying her. The deputy asked for permits. That was the moment the world stuttered, because what the foreman pulled out wasn't a permit. It was a photocopy of an HOA bylaw stapled to a sheet of county stationery. The sheriff flipped through it, his brows knitting deeper with each page. "This isn't authorization," he said flatly. "This is forged letterhead." Meredith finally spoke, her tone sweet enough to rot. "It's an administrative misunderstanding. Our community holds jurisdiction here." But the words fell brittle like glass about to shatter. Behind me, a cluster of neighbors had gathered, drawn by the roar of engines and the sight of authority. Whispers spread through the crowd as the deputy read aloud the forged text, his voice carrying the weight of truth. "This paper claims county approval for eminent domain seizure." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Eminent domain. That was the word of governments, not HOAs. Suddenly, everyone saw the curtain slip, the performance breaking down. I caught the eye of Mrs. Redmond, the quiet widow from 2 houses down, always so careful with her gardenias. Her face was pale, but her lips pressed tight with realization. She wasn't just thinking of my lake anymore. She was thinking of the lien notices that had started stacking on her porch last month, the ones she hadn't dared question. The foreman's men shifted uneasily, muttering among themselves. They weren't hired to get wrapped up in legal fraud. They were here for a paycheck. The sight of the sheriff's cruiser, the mention of forged permits, drained the bravado from their stance. Engines idled instead of roaring. Machines that had been seconds from tearing into my dock sat frozen in the light of exposure. Meredith turned to retreat, sunglasses hiding eyes that must have been boiling with fury. But a voice from the crowd pierced the silence. "How long have you been lying to us?" It was Tom Henderson, the retired machinist whose driveway had been cited for oil stains last winter. His words cracked the air like a whip, and suddenly the whispering crowd became something else. A current of suspicion, anger, betrayal. Neighbors began asking questions out loud, questions that had festered in silence for months. Why had fines doubled without notice? Why had dues been rerouted to special projects that no one had voted on? Why were citations never appealed, only enforced? Every question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to swat away. For the first time, Meredith Vale's composure faltered. Her chin lifted in brittle defiance, but her silence screamed louder than her words. The mask of authority was fracturing, and everyone could see the cracks spiderwebbing across its surface. I stood at the water's edge, watching the scene tilt, shift, unravel. The lies that had bound us were coming apart in public, thread by thread, exposed under the weight of daylight and diesel fumes. And though the board still clung to their act, I could smell the truth like ozone before a storm. Their power wasn't the law. It was an illusion, and illusions, once broken, never heal. By the time the sheriff's cruiser pulled away, the crowd of neighbors had become something more than onlookers. They had transformed into witnesses, and witnesses carry weight heavier than fines, heavier than bylaws. They carried memory, and memory, when spoken aloud, can topple empires. That night, the boardroom of Shoreline Vale was packed wall to wall, the air stifling with heat and suspicion. Meredith Vale sat at the head table, her sunglasses gone, eyes burning with the brittle edge of cornered power. The other board members shifted like schoolchildren, caught copying test answers, their papers stacked neatly, but their voices cracking when questioned. The neighbors weren't whispering anymore, they were demanding. Where had the dues gone? Who approved the liens? Why were demolition crews waiting at dawn without permits? When I placed the stolen minutes on the table, the ones pre-written before votes had even been cast, the sound that followed wasn't gasps. It was silence, sharp and cutting, the silence of recognition. The truth was written in black ink, undeniable. Their power had never been authority. It had been a theater. The sheriff entered halfway through the meeting with 2 county investigators in tow. Their evidence binders bulged like storm clouds ready to break. Forged letterheads, fake citations, bank transfers are tying HOA funds to Vale development projects. One by one, the masks shattered. Meredith tried to speak, but her words collided with the sound of handcuffs snapping shut on the foreman who'd forged the county permits. The crowd erupted, not with cheers, not yet, but with the low murmur of disbelief turning slowly into anger. I looked around at my neighbors, faces lit by the harsh fluorescence of that cramped hall. Mrs. Redmond's lips trembled as she held her gardenia gloves against her chest. Tom Henderson gripped the back of a folding chair like a man anchoring himself against a storm. Maya, my sister, her eyes wet but her chin high, nodded once at me across the room. In that moment I understood. This wasn't just about my lake. It was about all of us, about years of living under a shadow none of us had agreed to. The days that followed unraveled like a slow dawn. Meredith and her allies were stripped of their titles, their accounts frozen under state injunctions. The sheriff's office confirmed federal investigators were stepping in. For once, the news cameras pointed not at a disaster, but at justice being served, and the neighborhood began to breathe again. But peace doesn't arrive with parades. It seeps in like water after a drought, hesitant, uneven, fragile. I still woke some nights at the growl of phantom engines, my body bracing for bulldozers that weren't there. Some neighbors avoided my eyes, ashamed of their silence when the board's shadow seemed too long to challenge. Others stopped by with pies or quiet thank yous, gestures as clumsy as they were heartfelt. The lake changed too. Where once it had been patrolled by black SUVs and drones, now children skipped stones across its surface, their laughter skimming the water like dragonflies. The air smelled different, lighter, as though the soil itself had exhaled after years of being choked. I sat on my dock most evenings, the boards creaking under me, watching the ripples shimmer gold in the setting sun. Vindication didn't taste sweet. It tasted steady, like bread after hunger. In the end, the HOA was dismantled, its bylaws dissolved under state oversight. Shoreline Vale became what it should have been all along, a neighborhood, not a kingdom. The scars remained, of course. Trust lost doesn't grow back overnight, but we learned something together, something Meredith Vale had never counted on. Neighbors, once divided by silence and fear, had remembered how to speak, and me. I still walked the lake's edge at dusk, still felt the gravel bite my heels, heard the echo of that morning when steel teeth hovered over my dock. But the fear no longer owned me, because I had seen the masks split, seen illusion burn away, seen what happens when ordinary people refuse to bow. Every ripple on that lake reminded me of the truth. Tyranny doesn't always come with armies. Sometimes it comes with clipboards, bylaws, and polite letters that hide the sound of chains. But it can be defeated if someone stands, if someone speaks, if someone refuses to yield an inch, and I had.